We'll get started here in about 8 minutes or so. Thanks for your patience. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Thanks for your patience. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Thanks for your patience. All right, thanks for joining in this afternoon. I suspect that our session today will be fairly short because I'm doing a Q&A regarding the project, and then we also have to wrap up the session on waves. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So here we are at the course homepage. Um, if you see this, somebody please let me know so that I don't record with a blank screen.
Yes.
Thank you very much. All right. So first thing I want to do is go ahead and finish up where we left off on Monday. So I want to solve some sample problems regarding waves. In particular, I want to focus on the speed of sound. And so to get to that, I'm going to hit the announcements link. And if you recall, all the way down at the bottom, there's a link to extra resources. So in those extra resources, I'm just going to click and open that folder. And notice there's a folder that deals with waves. Okay. In that folder, you have some material that's kind of summarizes the information on waves that in particular that we talked about on Monday, the relationship between period and frequency. Notice in here, I also have a slide that kind of clarifies the units when you're measuring the speed of a wave. The unit is meters per second, just like we've always used for speed. But what I break down for you is the two ways that we can find speed by taking wavelength times 1 over the period and the appropriate units, which equate to meters per second, or wavelength times frequency, where we are using the unit hertz for frequency, but it can be broken down in terms of seconds. And so we also get meters per second if we utilize this form of the universal wave equation. So you have access to that in the folder on waves. Remember, these are extra notes. Every topic we cover has a set of extra notes that you are free to use, okay? I have a summary screenshot showing the relationship between period and frequency, the universal wave equation, taking a look at the relationship between the various formulas and the units, and then defining period and frequency for you. So those are major concepts that relate the properties of waves that we measure, okay? And then I have another slide here that looks at an example of using the wave equation. So this one example says an earthquake produces a wave that has a wavelength of 417 meters and travels at 5,000 meters per second. And he asked, what is the frequency? Okay, so this is an example of using the universal wave equation. We are given the wavelength and the speed. And here's my handy dandy problem solving pyramid. If I want to find frequency, I cover it up. That's what the smiley face represents. You always cover the variable you're looking for. And then it tells you you have to divide the speed by wavelength. Well, I know that because speed is on the top, wavelength is on the bottom. So 5,000 meters per second divided by 417 meters. So, you know, you can do the number part using a calculator. That gives you 12. But then the meters per second divided by meters. How does that work out to be hertz? Because hertz is the unit for frequency. So I have meters per second divided by meters. And so if you recall how to deal with fractions, when you divide by a fraction, you multiply by its reciprocal. Well, this meters per second is a fraction. This meters on the bottom in the denominator is also a fraction because I can write it over 1. And so then I just take meters per second times the reciprocal, 1 over meters. Meters cancel out. I'm left with 1 over seconds. That is the definition of a hertz in terms of units, okay? So that's how that all breaks down to get a hertz as the final unit. If you stop and tell me 12, 1 over seconds, I'm gonna take points because that shows that you haven't fully digested how to manage the units in this case, okay? So you will want to make sure that you follow through and indicate the appropriate unit, okay? So the other thing that I'm interested in is the speed of sound, okay? So, and that is because sound waves are an example of waves. And we don't really solve problems dealing with light waves at this level. We focus primarily on sound waves. And so, in fact, you know, sometimes students will send me an article for a project and it focuses on light waves. And for this class, I won't let you use it because we don't focus on light waves in this course. All right, so you can see here on this slide, it tells you that if air is at 20 degrees Celsius, sound will travel at 344 meters per second. And So that would, in my mind, that makes the question come up, well, what if the air is not at 20 degrees Celsius? What happens then, right? Well, it depends on the type of medium. As I mentioned Monday, sound can travel best through liquids and solids, liquids, then gas. And as I mentioned on Monday as well, sound can't travel through a vacuum. Light can travel in a vacuum, excuse me, but sound has to have a medium, okay? And also, the speed of sound will depend on the temperature of the medium. So the type of medium and the temperature of the medium can affect the speed of sound. Sound will travel faster in a medium at higher temperatures. You can think of it this way. If the temperature is higher, the molecules in the medium are more energetic, so the wave can pass through, because what is this wave? Energy. Okay? So there is a way to figure out the speed of sound if you know the temperature. And the formula that's listed is what we can use to do that. So it says the speed V is equal to 331 meters per second, which is like the baseline, plus 0.6 meters per second per degree Celsius. And then the T in this formula stands for temperature. So the way you use this formula is you substitute the temperature in Celsius for the variable T. Please do not mix this T up with period. This is not the period. This is the temperature in this formula. That's what the big capital T stands for, okay? So I did an example for you right here where I took the temperature of 45 degrees Celsius, and I wanted to know how fast is my sound wave gonna travel if the temperature is 45 degrees Celsius. Well, I take the 331 meters per second and I add to it 0.6 meters per second per degree Celsius, and I'll multiply that times 45 degrees Celsius. So I substituted 45 degrees Celsius for the capital T. So now let's multiply that out. Well, the 331 is our baseline, so we keep that. And then we add to it 0.6 times 45. That gives me 27. And notice there that the degrees Celsius are going to cancel out. And I'm left with a unit meters per second. So 331 meters per second plus 27 meters per second gives me 358 meters per second. So if the temperature outside is 45 degrees Celsius, then the sound is going to travel at 358 meters per second. So that's an example of how we can find the speed of sound due to its dependence on temperature. Okay. Any questions about that example? It's fairly straightforward, but I always like to work it because I've had students to mistake the meters per second per degree Celsius in the formula as variables. And I wanted you to see that those are actually units. T is the only variable in this formula. Any questions? Okay, I also have some nice stuff in here that you can, look over. It kind of reviews some of the stuff we talked about on Monday. And then it does have some additional information that you can take a look at, okay? Sorry, that's my puppy in the background growling. The benefits of working from home. All right, so that was pretty much what I wanted to cover with you on, cover with you today from the material that we started on Monday that I didn't get to finish, okay? So I'll close this. Now, the only other thing we have left on our plate today is the Q&A regarding the project, because I told you on Monday that you should go and review the project video that I made available in the announcements. I may even go back and add a link to it here, to the project video, just so you have it there as well. But what I want to know now is, what are your questions based on your review of the project details?
I haven't had an opportunity to watch it yet. Can you kind of sum it up real quick for me?
Yes, the project details explains to you that you are writing a 2-page summary. And if you looked at the picture templates as directed.
2? I thought it was 3.
No, the project, the picture templates tell you to put 4 to 5 sentences on a 3rd page. It doesn't have to be 3 pages long. It has to be 2 pages long. So let me break that down for you, right? Okay.
Oh, okay. That's okay. A lot better. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So I gave you here your first sentence, right? That tells you your first sentence. So you basically fill in the blanks there. That is so that you give proper attribution and credit to the, the creator of the article, right? You're using APA format, but you're not using all of APA format. Your margins have to be 1 inch all around, and you have to use double spacing, which is APA format, right? Also, you're not to write an abstract. Some students make the mistake of writing an abstract and a summary. Well, the summary is already an abstract. You don't need to do both, okay? So you're writing a 2-page summary explaining the article in your own words as best as you understand, okay? So this breaks down for you how you lay out the paper, right? 1 inch margins all around, double spacing. You have an ID block in the upper left corner, that's single space. I list the items that go in the ID block: your name, my name, the class and the section, and the date. You don't need a running header. I know that APA says use a running header. Please do not use a running header. The reason being, you're only writing a 2-page summary. If you're writing a thesis or dissertation, that would be appropriate, but we don't need all of that for a 2-page summary. That's clutter, right? So use an abbreviated header with your name and page number in the upper right corner. Also, you do not need in-text citations. If you are doing a research paper where you had to use multiple sources, then that would be appropriate. But your summary is supposed to be on the article that you got approved, and that's it. You don't have any other sources for this summary. You should not be using books, other websites, Wikipedia, or any other material to write this summary. The summary is about your article. Now, that means the only source is the one you listed in your first sentence. So you don't need to use in-text citations, okay? If you do quote from the article, which you are allowed to do in a limited capacity, put the page number in parentheses after you close the quotation. So if you take something verbatim from the article, put it in quotes like you're supposed to, because if you don't, that's plagiarism. After you close the quote, but in parentheses, put the page number in your article where you took the quote from. I gave you picture templates. So let me show you. Let me go back to the project folder. See these picture templates? So they can kind of guide you as to the layout that you're supposed to be following. I hope you can see that. I want to zoom in on it. Bear with me for a second. Okay. So you should be able to see that pretty good. So it tells you use APA for all margins and spacing.
Yeah, I can see it.
I'm sorry.
I can see it.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I forgot to get the thumbs up on that part. Great. All right. So a cover page is optional. In fact, I would advise you not to do a cover page. I know APA has that beautiful cover page, but remember, we are only using portions of APA and not the full APA. So if you do a cover page, I'm not even going to look at it. What I'm going to look at is, did you properly put an ID block as I asked you to? Did you use an abbreviated header? Did you give your summary a title and not the title of the article? The title of the article belongs to the author who wrote it. Make up your own title for your summary of the article. And then your first paragraph, you skip appropriately and you start your first paragraph. I gave you the first sentence. You're not using any in-text citations because you're only summarizing that one article. I told you how to properly quote, okay? And then put 4 to 5 sentences on a third page so that you meet the length requirement. Let me explain that. Your summary is to be 2 pages long from your first sentence to your last period. So when I say 2 pages long, I don't mean on 2 pages, I mean 2 pages long. So all this stuff up here at the top, the ID block, the title, the abbreviated header, that's not counted in the page count. When you start your first sentence, that starts the page count. So you need about 4 to 5 sentences on a third page to meet the length requirement. Okay? Does that make sense to you? All right.
Yes.
And then I kind of gave a screenshot as well of the reference page because you have to include a reference page. That reference page must be formatted according to APA, which means you put references at the top, you skip appropriately, and then you write the citation for your article in APA format, okay? Now, if you need to know what that looks like, for most of you, if you took your article from Hindawi or the app that I gave you, Xarvid, I believe is how you pronounce it, or you use the library resources, they have a citation formatter for you. But if you're not totally sure about that, you can go to one of the references that I have in the project details and check it out, okay? There's a sample paper for you in APA format, okay? So they show you. Maybe I gotta blow it up for it to scroll. Let's see, there we go, okay? So now just remember, some of the things they're showing here, you're not doing, right? You're not doing a cover page. You're not doing an abstract. You don't need a running header. A lot of the stuff that they're doing is because they're doing a research paper, but you're only doing a short summary. But they show you in the paper, for example, how you format a reference in APA format, okay? So you can see, for example, this Armstrong reference here, Armstrong JS. They're using an article and they show you how you format a citation. Notice that references is bolded and there's no double spacing between references and the first entry. Just like on your first page, let's go back to the first page here after the abstract. See, they gave a title, it's bolded, and look, the first paragraph starts immediately after that, right? There's no extra space. You know, like sometimes students put like triple spacing or extra space after the title. There's no extra space in APA format, okay? So those things are very helpful to know when looking at the sample paper, you know, to make sure that you get it right, okay? But, you know, I tried to put as much as I could in the project details or give you access to it in the project folder, okay? You have to have a reference page. Plagiarism. I will give you a flat out 0 if you plagiarize. And let's be clear that plagiarism doesn't, I think most folks know if they copy something word for word, that's plagiarism. But here's the other thing that gets students in trouble, okay? So like, you see what it says here? Changing words, but copying the sentence structure of a source without giving credit. Or giving incorrect information about where you got your, you know, your information. Failing to put a quotation in quotation marks. This is one that gets students in a lot of hot water because they say, well, I put the page number, but you didn't put the material that you copied verbatim in quotation marks. That's plagiarism. So if you copy word for word, make sure that you put it in quotes, okay? And please do not play the thesaurus game with me, where you take a few words in a sentence and you put synonyms, but everything else pretty much stays the same. That's plagiarism. My suggestion to you is write the summary in your own words. Don't try to write the way the author does because I can tell the difference. You don't write on the level that they do. You're supposed to be breaking this down for me in layman's terms. Tell me in your own words, in as simple a, you know, form as possible, what the article is about. Okay, break it down for me. And then also don't forget, you're supposed to tell me how the article connects to our class, whether that's lecture or lab. If you're in lecture, tell me how the article connects to the things you're learning in lecture. If you're in lab, tell me how it connects to the things you're learning in lab, all right? You have to include a full copy of the article. That could be when you email me your summary, you could put me a link to the article, or you can, you know, like the email where you got your article approved, you could forward that and include the summary, because I will go back to check what did you get approved and make sure that what you got approved is the actual article you summarize, okay? So just be aware of that. If you don't include a reference page, you lose 5 points. If you don't include a copy of the article or at least a link to the article, you lose 5 points, all right? So we'll take a quick peek at the rubric here in just a moment, but are there any questions about anything I've covered here so far? Is that a good enough summary of the project for you so far?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, and there was another student who asked me to kind of give a quick rundown of it. That student.
Yes, ma'am, that's fine.
Okay, all right. The only other thing that I want to take a look now is at the rubric because I want to be thorough in this. This tells you how your project will be scored. Okay, and this one says lecture, But when I score the projects for lab, this section will say lab, right? So the rubric is specific to whatever class you're in, all right? But what I'm looking for is pretty much the same, okay? So the project is worth 100 points. When you turn it in to me this weekend, it's due on the 17th. Excuse me. When you turn in the project this Saturday, I will complete a rubric for you, and you will get the project back no later than 1 week. My goal is to give you access to your project score before you go into the final exam, all right? So I'll do a rubric for you explaining whatever points you got or whatever points you missed, okay? So the project is worth 100 points. So what I did was I broke that 100 points down into 5 categories. Each category is worth a maximum of 20 points. So I'm gonna focus on what it would take in each category to do a good job, because I don't have to tell students how to do a bad job. They pretty much figure that out on their own. But what is it that I'm looking for that will get you in this category, this point level? So the summary, I'm looking for, is the summary in your own words? Are you telling me about the article, or are you using a bunch of jargon that's, germane to the article and the author who wrote it? Are you using their words more than you using your own? Are you over quoting? I tell students I operate with a kind of a 80-20 rule. If more than 20% of your summary is quoted, that's too much. So you'll lose points, okay? So you want to pay, you want to write the summary about the article in your own words as much as possible. And if there are instances where you have to quote, you must do it properly. I will consider that plagiarism and you will get a 0, okay? Connections to lecture class. Are you telling me how the article relates to things you've learned in class? So let me be specific and give you some examples, okay? So we have talked about a lot of different properties over the course of this semester. Think about it. We've done things like volume, density, mass, temperature, speed, velocity, acceleration, distance, displacement, force, momentum, impulse, energy, work, power. I mean, and all the astronomy stuff that we've talked about, that you've covered. So if you see those properties being utilized in your article, it would be proper for you to say, I noticed that the author, focuses on whatever property. Let's say it's energy. I noticed in this article, the author focuses on energy. We learned about mechanical energy, kinetic and potential in our lecture class. That's I'm not saying that they will focus on energy, but I'm giving you an example of how you might acknowledge the connections. You might notice that they're using units that you've come across. Let's say they're doing energy and the unit they're using is joules. And you say, hey, when we covered mechanical energy, we also use joules. Or you might notice that they're covering the same property, but they're using different units, for example. Hey, we covered mechanical energy. We typically use joules, but I noticed this author is using electron volts. Okay, or what, whatever is different, right? If this were lab class, I would say, suppose they're doing an error analysis of some sort, and they're using percent error just the way you did. It would be fair to acknowledge that. If they're doing an error analysis, but they're using some other technique, you might say that, hey, our error analysis consisted of doing percent error, but I noticed they're using this technique. Okay, so by the kind of comparison contrast, if you will, you can establish that you know that there's some connection to a lecture class. Maybe they're using the scientific method. A lot of these articles, because they focus on research, use a format that's very similar to what's used in our lab reports for lab class, or the scientific method as we discussed it in lecture. Okay, so it might be fair game for you to acknowledge and say, hey, I noticed they have a methodology section, which is very close to the procedure section that we did in our lab reports. Or I noticed that, you know, they have a hypothesis in this article. We learned that a hypothesis is, you know, is a testable prediction, right? Anything that you can do to let me know that you see that there's a connection between the stuff you learned in this class and the article that you're reviewing and summarizing. All right. Article choice. If you got your article approved, you automatically get 20 points in that category. Okay. If you did not get your article approved, of course, if you read the project details, it tells you, you can definitely do the project, right? You can do the summary. You're just doing it with an article that wasn't approved, so you automatically lose 20 points in the article choice category. Also, it tells you in the project details that if you didn't get an article approved and the article does not meet the standards, meaning it's not on the right topic, it's not long enough, or it's not peer reviewed, then you automatically get a 0 on the project, and the project details tell you that specifically. Okay, because I've had to give students a 0 because they chose the wrong kind of article or source to summarize, and then they want to, you know, get upset and question and say, well, you know, but it's spelled out in the project details. And if you aren't doing a project on an appropriate article, in essence, you aren't doing the project. Okay, so article choice. Organization. So I'm looking to see that your summary is well organized. You have a very clear introduction. In fact, I gave you the first sentence, right? So you have a very clear introduction that explains what you're going to be focusing on. You have nice body paragraphs that, you know, expand on what you mentioned in your introduction, and you have a conclusion, a very clear conclusion. Just like you do when you write an essay in an English class, right? And so, and you won't have any issue with this. Says the purpose of the paper is clear from the very beginning, and the name and author of the article is made clear early in the paper. Well, that's in your first sentence. So you took care of that already, right? If you make sure your first sentence is correct. If it's not, then I'm gonna deduct points, okay? Students ask me sometimes regarding organization, do you want us to have just a paragraph on connections, or do we put connections throughout our summary? Either way is fine, as long as you establish connections and everything flows smoothly, right? Under organization, I tell students, tell me the story of your article and how it connects to our class. Okay. Mechanics requirements. This is where I'm looking to see that your summary is long enough. I will do, you know, I'm not an English professor, so I can't catch everything they do, but I do look at blatant grammar and typos and that kind of thing, right? Because your summary is 2 pages long, typed, double space, 12-point font. Okay, that's explained in the project details. All right. So I'm not trying to be an English professor. You know, I know there's, for example, something that dangles and you get in trouble for that with English professors. I don't know. I just know that when I read it, if I catch something that's, you know, an obvious misspelling, or the sentence structure doesn't flow right, then I typically, you know, deduct some points for that. But, you know, the other thing I'm looking for in this category, mechanics requirement, is do you have a properly formatted reference page? And did you include a copy of your article or at least a link to it? Okay. So those are the things that I'm looking for when I score your project. For each project that is submitted, I will include a rubric explaining the points you received and any points that were deducted. What are your questions on how we'll score the project? All right. If you forget any of this, don't hesitate to go and take a look at that project video. I think I did a pretty thorough job of explaining the summary itself and how we'll score it. All right. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. It's open mic time. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask your question. Other than that, we're pretty much done for today. And I'll see you back here on next Monday.
So we're done with class now?
Yeah, because as I mentioned on Monday, I had to finish up waves. You are doing the astronomy unit. Your project is due next week, and I don't have any new material to lecture on, as I mentioned Monday. So this is the last time you got to hear me lecture. I mean, we might talk about the final exam, but that's about it. I'll do that next week.
All right. Sounds great.
All right. So if you don't have any questions for me, we're all done. Y'all have a fabulous rest of your evening and a good weekend.
You too.
Take care.